I'm Tom Menser, the chairman, and today we have a new secretary, Darla Eastman, and I'd like to thank our old secretary who did an excellent job and held us together for many years, Suzanne Derryberry, and I wanted to thank her for all the work she did for us, and so Suzanne, wherever you are. I also like to welcome City Councilman today. I want to congratulate all the 3 new councilmen, Mr. Lamerson, and I look forward to meeting the other 2. I don't know if you're going to stay on. I asked you as a liaison. You said we will see. So you've been here a long time doing that, so I think that's good. Also like to congratulate the new mayor-elect, Mr. Harry Oberg, a fellow ex-Army officer and a fellow ex-Vietnam veteran. So thank you for your service, Harry, and welcome to the mayor's office. I understand he's on vacation right now, so probably well-deserved. All right, very good. We're going to move on. Like I said, this is going to basically be a study session. Normally, study sessions, we have a choice of whether or not the public can speak. In this case, whoever wants to speak, it's fine with me. I'll open it up to the public as soon as we get done discussing it. George, I understand that the first parcel, this involves over 1,300 acres. All items 1, 2, 3 all pertain to the same parcel?
That's correct, Chairman.
There's annexation, a master plan,
and a proposed rezoning, all as a package for that. We're calling it the northern annexation piece. And then there's the last 2 items are for the second annexation, which is
a smaller parcel.
320.
Same basic package, though.
That's correct. And
okay. Let's take the first 3 and we'll deal with them all at one time.
Very good. What I would like to do is just take a moment and point out some items on the map that I have up on the screen just to give you some proximity of the annexation areas to the existing city corporate limits. The first annexation that you mentioned, the 1,300 acre larger of the 2 annexations, is directly west across the airport, from the airport. That's highlighted in the pink area up here. And it involves a full mix of land uses involving commercial, residential, multifamily, residential, single family, and some industrial that is in closer proximity to the airport or to the flight path that leads off of the airport. And we'll talk briefly about the impact zones associated with the airport as we get further into that. Before I start that one, however, I want to point out the second annexation area is 320 some odd acres. It's in this area north of Pioneer Park, west of Pinyon Oaks subdivision, and it would extend the corporate limits northward and westward to about the existing county subdivision over here, Williamson Valley subdivision. So a little proximity information associated with the general plan. All of this area was included in the land uses designated through the general plan process that this commission participated in substantially over the last year. Part of the most recent change to the general plan that was incorporated into the land use document of the general plan that was just ratified by the voters by a substantial amount. I do want to pat this commission, city council, and planning staff on the back for that. 80% approval rating for a general plan is pretty good in Arizona. The amendment that was made to the general plan as part of the process that ended up on the ballot and before the voters involved just a small portion of this. This area, sort of a triangle area north of the green line. The green line is a wash that runs through. That area was originally, under the old general plan, a ranching designation, not a single-family designation. So what's shown in light yellow on this map represents areas that are intended for single-family development of various densities. So just to point out that most of this area has been in the general plan and on the general plan's land use map for several years. In addition to that, one of the concepts that came out of the airport's master plan and concern for this by the city for protecting development in and around the airport is sort of a master plan for any development that comes in nearby. There is also a requirement under Proposition 400, which addresses any annexations over 250 acres, that also requires a master plan. So the master plan that was originally developed for this property was done so in 2009, and it was intended to cover those areas specifically to address the airport impact zones, which are these areas where we don't want residential development because it's in close proximity to the airport runway and flight patterns, as well as providing for commercial and residential uses that made sense based on potential street alignments. There are a couple of street alignment issues I want to talk about just to give you an idea. This was anticipated to be an initial realignment of Willow Creek Road. It would bypass the current angle comes in somewhere right in this vicinity. So this would go up north of and connect to the new roundabout under construction at Ruger Road, the realigned Ruger Road alignment. There are potential future street alignments, obviously, that would occur as development occurs in the area, both north of Pinion Oaks and Pioneer Parkway and west of 89. These are just the approximations of the major roadways. Actual alignment of the streets is determined through various processes. The city and the county are jointly doing this realignment, and that determination was made by the city for the alignment of realignment of Willow Creek Road. Any other street alignments will likely occur only at the time of development pressures, such as the submittal of subdivision plats or proposals for commercial development and site plans. So a lot of this is tenuous at this point in time, but general alignments will be somewhat similar to this. And again, one of the issues that we were seriously looking at was to protect the end of the runway from residential encroachment that causes conflicts on both sides. The residential development has a conflict with the aircraft overflights, and the airport has complaints because of it, and therefore we want to avoid that with industrial and commercial development in those areas. And we'll look at the proposed rezoning map in a couple of minutes, and it will show you specifically how we've avoided having residential in those areas that are shown in the light pink and purple designations here. So the annexation proposal for, again, the northern topic includes the master plan amendment that I talked about, which makes this area residential, single-family residential, and various densities associated with it. It also includes a rezoning to go with the annexation. Typical process is when the city annexes property from the county, it comes in initially with the county zoning or an equivalent city zoning to whatever the county zoning is, and then the property owner has the option to immediately ask for rezoning. In almost all cases, that annexation involves a rezoning request with it. They're simply handled sequentially by council in their actions to adopt the annexation. In this particular case, that's exactly what we have. This is the northern half of the northern annexation. So this is 89, and adjacent to that, this is the new Ruger roundabout realignment location. So that will provide a primary access into this property from Highway 80 or State Route 89. You can see that most of the single family, which is designated on this map as SF, is north and west, away from that intersection, which is at the northern edge of the boundary of the airport overflight and impact zones. So these areas are appropriate under those circumstances for residential, single-family, lower density development. The area designated BR is business regional. That's a fairly intensive business zoning district that allows almost all of our commercial retail, office, auto dealerships, that type of use. It is a higher intensity, very appropriate for adjoining State Route 89 and highway type frontages. Directly behind that is a multifamily zoning district. Multifamily zoning, allowing for apartment complexes or condominium type complexes, is very appropriate near the impact zones, but not necessarily in them. And again, I'll put up the impact zone map. It's a little confusing to look at, so I don't want to start with it. Behind that, a small mixed-use area, and then an area that is not included in this annexation. This is part of a state land piece, as is this piece further south here, that would be subject to some future annexation request by the State Land Department. As we transition further southward, this industrial zoning district, IL, lies within a portion of that airport overflight area, one of the portions that has the higher impact zone designation, so it's not appropriate for residential use, may or may not be appropriate for general commercial use, but industrial uses are appropriate in those areas. So that's one of the reasons for the strange zigzags and curves, is because these are an attempt to align with that airport impact zone map. Behind that, business regional again, and then multifamily high again. So the only low-density residential is in the north and very far west. Everything else is something that is more compatible with and able to interact better with the airport and the airport operations. One other note regarding the alignment of these districts. They are somewhat intended to take into account the current proposed and potential future alignments of Willow Creek Road. As I noted, this will be the intersection, roundabout intersection, where Willow Creek Road will connect with 89. This alignment is the approximate alignment of the Willow Creek realignment underway, or at least in planning stages right now. At a future date, further realignment or a new roadway will likely come up here and make a connection through here. That gives us some lines that make sense as far as where to separate different zoning districts. Major roadways are typically used as delimiters for particular types of zoning, so you have one type of zoning on one side of the major road and perhaps another on the other side. So just wanted to make sure that was understood. This is actually a zoomed in section of our trails and open space map from the general plan. Again, we're using the general plan map as much as we can. You can see Pioneer Park labeled at the bottom. This is Pinyon Oak subdivision. This area is currently inside the city. If it shows as a light blue color or gray color, the annexation would incorporate that and this, which doesn't really get into this larger area over here at this point. We'll talk about some of that with the second annexation in just a couple of moments. I've mentioned the airport impact zone map a couple of times, and as you can see, this is why I didn't want to start with it. It is rather complicated. The numbers typically are, as they get larger, more and more compatible with residential uses. So areas like number 1 are actually at the end of the runway. The current alignment of Willow Creek Road is right here. It runs right through the numeral 1 in the on the map. The the area immediately adjacent to the runway and directly in line with the runway are areas that we try to avoid having low-density residential in, because those areas are more adversely impacted by low-density residential. This is a dual-purpose map, if you want to call it that. Its first purpose is to protect the airport from nearby land uses that might have an adverse impact on its operation. But it also helps us protect future property owners or future development by separating out those uses that are going to have problems with aircraft overflights and airport operations. So you can see these odd curves are based on flight patterns, and that's why the zoning on the previous maps has those odd shapes to it. They're designed to follow or work around these airport overflight areas.
And this is the latest airport plan, right?
Yes, this is the airport impact zone.
Latest one?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, we conducted a study, a very thorough study, using a consultant who specializes in airport impacts and land uses in order to develop this map with these zones. So they used information and knowledge that they've garnered from other development of airports and developments near airports around the country in order to help develop this for us. So the second annexation area is much smaller. It's 321 acres. It currently is all open range land, as is the first area. Sorry, I just got a signal from outside that I didn't have a button pushed properly over here. This area would be adjacent to and adjoining the Pinyon Oak subdivision and just north of the northern edge of Pioneer Parkway. So that would be included in this area right here. So it would have immediate frontage on part of Pioneer Park and immediate frontage on the adjacent subdivisions in the county and Pinyon Oaks in the city. That area has long been in various city planning documents. In 2001, the city adopted what was called the Airport Specific Area Plan. It's a very large rectangular area around the airport where we planned outside the corporate limits in order to assist the county and Prescott Valley and Chino Valley in their planning efforts to make sure, again, compatibility with the airport was considered in any type of new proposal, rezonings, or developments. This area has been designated for residential use down here, mix of single family and potentially multifamily development. That odd triangular shape, wedge-shaped, darker color is a designation to allow for a multifamily zoning, and I'll show you the proposed zoning map in just a moment. Immediate access to this property can be had from both east and west through Pinyon Oak subdivision. There is a stub street that will go into this property. And from the subdivisions in the county on the west side, there are two different points of access that are possible. One is actually designated as a road right-of-way and would allow access. It is also possible at some point in the future to make a connection directly to Pioneer Parkway. The original design of Pioneer Parkway anticipated street connections somewhere in this vicinity. The street's actually laid out with a right-of-way that stubs for potential connection. At this point in time, there's no plan to do that. Probably would be dependent upon future development pressures when these properties actually come in and want to subdivide and develop. Apologize for it being washed out. All of this area is actually a light yellow color, and it's designated low to medium density residential. This again is the master plan map that was part of the original pre-annexation agreement. for this area. None of this master plan will change as part of the proposal, so there's no amendment to the master plan with the second annexation. That's why there are only 2 items associated with this second annexation. Yes, sir.
George, could you point out the second annexation in this map?
It actually follows that line all the way across to there.
Okay.
So it's this area right here. Zoning for that area is proposed to be pretty much exactly the same as was anticipated on the general plan land use map. Our SF-18 is our most common zoning district. It falls directly into the middle of the range of allowed districts in the low to medium density that's identified in the general plan. So that would be almost all of this property, with the exception of 42 acres, which we've identified here, matching the general plan for potential multifamily. And multifamily high actually also falls within that range of potential uses on the general plan's land use map. So that area is designated as multifamily high.
And what kind of density is that?
Up to 32 units per acre, but we rarely ever see anything get to that density in actual development because of setback requirements and landscaping and parking.
That'd be like
Usually it's more like 20.
Like garden apartments.
It could be garden apartments. It could be something even higher
Like
intensity than
3-story
that.
max?
Yes.
What's the lot size on the SF-18?
18,000 square foot minimum, so approximately
Minimum.
half an acre.
So that's bigger than the lots in Pinyon Oaks.
Yes, although the zoning is the same. Pinyon Oaks is considered a planned area development, so their lot sizes are slightly smaller in some parts of it. In other parts of it, they are at 18,000 square
Oh,
feet.
okay.
Yeah.
I thought they were a little higher density.
That means, George, that in the event that this goes, when it does come in for zoning as a PAD, there could be slight modifications in lot sizes and setbacks and so forth.
That's very true. Any of
That's
the
active.
areas proposed for residential development could be proposed as a planned area development, PAD. Planned area development allows the developer to propose higher density, has to add additional open space to his design and other amenities that benefit the residents of that proposed area in order to qualify for a PAD. But it does allow them to make the lot sizes smaller and the density higher in certain portions. The overall density of the development still cannot exceed the 18 designation that we would have.
But George, at this point, all we're talking about is these 2 zoning.
Yes, sir. At this point in time, it's the overall zoning, the underlying zoning that would be in effect. A future request for a planned area development occurs on top of the zoning. It's something that's in addition to the zoning.
At a later date.
That's correct. It would be a site-specific or development-specific application.
Is this on? In calculating the SF-18, that includes the whatever open space and unused land might be with it, and so you could have 12,000 square foot lots, half or quarter acre lots, as long as the overall calculation for the 40 acres includes
Under
18.
That's correct. Under a PAD, we look at what the maximum density would be using this, and then they can make it denser in places as long as they make it less dense in other places so that it evens
But
out.
just how dense could it be? I mean, could you have 6,000 square foot lots in an SF-18?
It's possible with a planned area development to propose something like that. Very difficult to do given the topography in that particular area. We would likely see something that takes advantage of the ridge lines where development occurs along those rather than the bottoms of the washes. That's not an uncommon approach in Prescott, especially given topographical issues and the costs involved in development. And just one final comment from staff, and then I would certainly be open to any other questions you have. Again, the airport impact zone map, you can clearly see those impact zones are nowhere near the property. This is Pinyon Oaks subdivision, so the second annexation is from here westward and well outside all of those impact zones. With that, I would be happy to answer any questions you may have. I do have a follow-up comment at the end of the process just to tell you what the next steps are, but at this point,
Can you go back to the overall plan? The whole area we're considering? How far do Deep Well ranches extend beyond this?
Considerably.
I mean, all of this?
Yes.
I mean,
Well, if you recall, in most areas like this, there is a checkerboard of state trust lands and private property lands. They're all under the ranching control of Deep Well ranches, as we understand, but the actual ownership is a checkerboard. So this area is state land. This area is probably Deep Well ranches and state land, et cetera, as forms the checkerboard up there.
Okay. Questions?
No?
I have a
Yeah.
couple more things, George.
Certainly.
Could you explain to us the existing agreement resolution between Deep Well Ranches and that exists and the city? And also, could you explain to me how Prop 400 affects this approval?
The city entered into a pre-annexation agreement with Deep Well Ranches to lay out potential future annexations and the order of those annexations, as well as potential future land uses that were to ensure that their proposals for annexation would conform to the city's general plan. That pre-annexation agreement sets out the steps necessary and who's responsible for each of those steps. The processing of the annexation through review by this body and ultimately into the city council for action is tasked to the city staff by that pre-annexation agreement. So we are presenting it to you as a city-sponsored annexation as a result of that agreement. The property owner desires the annexation. There is only two property owners involved in the combined two annexations, and both of those property owners are on board. We anticipate that the remainder of the agreement's requirements are primarily going to be associated with the development that occurs several years down the road, whenever that development occurs. Those things would be who's responsible for extension of water and sewer utilities, street utilities, and those types of criteria. Again, it was all negotiated between the city council and the property owner to the benefit of both. As for the Prop 400, Proposition 400 requires certain additional steps beyond a typical annexation. With typical annexations in the state of Arizona, the property owner requests an annexation, the city goes through a review and approval process at this level for Planning Commission review, then on the city council for action, and then 30 days following council's action, that annexation becomes effective. With the Proposition 400, additional requirement is that once this body recommends in favor of the master plan, that's the trigger for the process, the master plan, let me take a step back. Proposition 400 requires any annexation over 250 acres to have a master plan in effect at the time of the annexation. That is in effect already with this situation. These lands are all covered by a master plan with the exception of the amendment to include this corner, which was not included in the original master plan. Once this body takes an action on the master plan, makes a recommendation to council on the master plan, a 60-day citizen review process begins, as well as a city-sponsored or city-initiated cost-benefit analysis, which is a detailed analysis of potential costs and potential benefits to the city, usually financial benefits, but also benefits associated with or costs associated with provision of services for the annexation area. So we conduct this cost-benefit analysis, and it's presented to the city council prior to any action they take. The 60-day period allows for public input, review, and comment all through that process. And that 60-day period extends the length of an annexation review by an additional 30 to 60 days beyond what typical review processes are. So Proposition 400 primarily gives the public additional time to comment.
Is that an independent consultant that does that study?
Yes.
Sarah Merlin.
The city hires a consultant to do that study, and that study is done using the land use assumptions that we're proposing to you. So they take the proposed zoning districts, and they take the information associated with future city capital improvement projects for water and sewer extensions, and they use all of that information along with market studies for what might be the benefits as far as development and costs back to the city or funds back to the city through that development.
Okay.
I have a question, Tom.
Okay.
George, I think it's important that in your part of your presentation that you referred to the Deep Well Ranch pre-annexation agreements, and in that there were certain water rights that were transferred and that the city has, so that we're not looking at new sources of water, even though we don't get into the water issues. That's the Water Advisory Committee. But in that pre-annexation agreement, provisions were made from whatever the city has at that water bank. Water was set aside for this at that time back in whatever year it was.
That's correct. This area is part of the overall area that was incorporated under that master plan and pre-annexation agreement. During that same time frame, that property owner confirmed water rights for a particular amount of water, and the city set aside that water back then. So it's been banked specifically for development on these properties since that pre-annexation development agreement came into effect.
09.
So none of these areas will require new allocation out of the city's water
And I
resources.
think that's important for the general public to know, because we're going to be talking about this thing for the next 60 to 90 days, and water probably will come up in some of those conversations. And
Definitely.
it has been looked into and provided for based on the pre-annexation agreement of 2009.
That's correct. This property owner has a water allocation that he can expend on these properties through development.
Okay.
Okay, well, on that same thing, when we saw the other SF-18s up there, was there enough water in the agreement to handle that, or is some of that really, we need the Big Chino to provide water? I mean, can the whole project be done?
The annexation areas that are proposed at this time should be able to build out at the zonings that are proposed or shown on the maps that we showed you without expending beyond the amount of water that was available to the property owner. That doesn't mean necessarily that he has to spend it on that development. At some point in the future, he could simply say, we're not going to develop that part of it, and the water that he has been allocated is transferable within the area that was covered by that original agreement. So it could shift from one place to another up here, but it's not going to be expended beyond the boundaries of this Deep Well Ranch area.
But we don't really know whether there's enough water to do all of it that you showed with the zoning in the land use map from the general plan.
The areas that are shown on these two annexations should be able to be developed
On
with the
these
water
two,
available.
right, but are they using it all up now? You know, I guess that's the question.
Not for us.
The way
And the answer to that
my
question is the
understanding-
property owner has the ability to spend it all in one place if that's what he wants
Right.
to
But
do.
he came back with multifamily in those other areas and doing rezoning and things, they can use it up real
It
quickly.
could. It could.
So
But that's not
that's-
what we're talking about today.
No.
George, my
Okay.
question is, if I could get a better clarification, both of these applications for annexation already have water rights?
That's correct.
That's right.
Yeah, there was a certain amount of acre feet of water that was involved in this, and it's already been banked and set aside to be used for these annexations. Now, if they go less acreage for single family, more acres for multifamily, they only got so many acre feet. And let's use a number, just throwing it out that doesn't mean anything. Let's say 1,800 acre feet of water is available. And as they use various amounts, the calculations are made, and they might only develop 3/4 of this and run out of the 1,800 feet, and that's it. So even though they've got more land and more development to do, they've only got a certain amount of water that's been set aside.
Well, that's right, but from a land use perspective, what if you came in right now and said, we want to just do apartments and condos everywhere and use it all up on one little corner? Maybe it's their right to propose that, but if we're looking at land use, we can say, well, I'm not sure that that's really what we intended when we looked at that larger area in terms of single-family homes, et cetera.
To do something like that would require a future rezoning process that would go through this body for review for appropriateness of land use, and then it would go to council for any action. And again, this is initiated by the city under that pre-annexation agreement, and we're proposing land uses that conform to the current general plan land uses, so the zoning would match the general plan map. But that doesn't preclude the property owner at some point in the future coming in and requesting changes to zoning. All property owners have that ability and that right to ask for a change to the zoning. The city council will make a determination as to the appropriateness during that review process and say yes or no to a rezoning.
Okay. So that to verify that this is a city-initiated annexation.
That's correct.
Okay.
Under that agreement, we're the ones who are processing it.
Now, we're having a public hearing. This is more of a work session, everybody.
Yes.
Public hearing on September 10th. Would that be possible to vote on September 10th?
At that time, we would ask you to make a recommendation on yes or no on the annexations.
And that would start the 60-day period?
Yes, but it involves several things. Well, we would ask you to recommend for or against the annexation. We would ask you to recommend for or modify and recommend for the zoning proposed for the area. And then the key to the 60-day period is we would ask you to approve or recommend approval of the master plan. So that amendment to that one small corner up here actually triggers most of the rest of the 400 process.
So that could happen September 10th.
September 10th is when we're going to ask you to do that.
That could start the 60-day.
It will be up to this body to do so.
So,
Commissioners?
George, if I understand correctly, what we're here today to do is to review the application for annexation, to look at the proposed master plan and the airport area plan for this entire area, but limiting our scope to the areas on this map in pink.
The annexation areas, right. That is correct.
So with that, I have a couple questions.
Certainly.
The state land, that's some weighty elephant in the middle of the plan. We seem to be working around the state land. So I have a couple questions. Does the state land carry with it any water rights?
No. State Land Department is a private property owner as far as almost all city services and processes. They can request annexation and they can negotiate a pre-annexation agreement, which is what we would anticipate them doing for the state trust lands. The purpose of state trust lands is to be sold for development. That is the reason the state owns them.
Right.
So we treat them just like any other private property owner / developer.
And when would you anticipate something like that might happen?
No idea. The state works in mysterious ways.
Really? Unlike the city.
Unlike the city.
So
we're very transparent.
I guess my question is, if all of us in this room are landowners here, we're probably going to want to look at this. What is that? A couple hundred acres there of state land.
At least, yes, sir. So
it's in the middle of what we're trying to discuss. Is there any way to deal with that section that's right in the middle of this plan?
At this point in time, no. Although state law allows a municipality to, I hate to use forcibly annex someone's property. I mean, we can decide that we want to try to annex property, and the requirement under state law is simply that we get 51% of the property owners saying yes. Well, 49% of them can be annexed against their recommendation. Our city council has never followed that process. It's not something that council has proposed to do, annex someone who doesn't want to be annexed right now. And the state land department has not asked to be annexed, so we're not going to forcibly annex their property. They are very reactive to development pressures. If someone wanted to acquire that land from them for development purposes, it would trigger their contact with us to annex it in, rezone the property to appropriate levels based on the annexation, and then sell or lease to that particular property to a developer for it. Until that happens, there's no benefit to them to be annexed in.
And is that section there, whatever number of acres it is that included in this master plan?
It actually is, yes.
Mm-hmm. But that's where my question was going to.
But, you know, like
So within the
Glassford
master,
Hill-
I'm sorry, sir.
Well, like Glassford Hill, that has a lot of state land on it that was annexed into the city, and so what motivated the city to annex all of that land that was not part of any development plan, like with Storm Ranch or anything at that time? Was that state land that initiated that? I mean, state land has all of this land for sale. They'd like to sell it to get the money for the schools and so on and so forth. So all of this land's for sale, so it just takes a buyer out there to come in and say, hey, we want to lease it or buy it or whatever the case may be.
That's true. That's typically the trigger for them to contact us, if someone's interested in their
The purpose of
property.
my question in reference to the state land is to make sure that we're all aware that that land is part of this master plan.
It is, and in fact, if you look at the master plan up on the screen, this is that state land square that you're talking about. So it has been considered, mostly for low to medium density residential. Where streets cross, generally where major streets cross, you want to have some kind of mixed use or commercial at those intersections. Intersections of major streets are not conducive to residential development. So that was done, and that was done with input by the State Land Department at the time this master plan was developed. So we developed the master plan with city representation, property owner representation, and State Land Department in order to address all of their concerns. The State Land Department, about 10 or more years ago, went across the entire state and developed a plan of some kind for all of their properties. Wow. Everywhere that the State Land Department potentially could sell properties. They were done somewhat in isolation without necessarily looking at what the adjacent cities were proposing. But in this particular case, they and we worked together to come up with this potential for those properties at whatever point in time when they desire to annex in.
For future discussion about this issue, if the State Land Department or somebody or their designee, whoever they sold it to, wanted to come in and be part of another annexation in the future, this master plan would have a major impact on how that land is annexed.
That master plan and the general plan land use map, which I've got up now, are going to control what types of zoning could occur within those areas.
Okay.
Amendments to that are possible, but difficult, and they would have to go through the review and approval process.
That we all heard that, so that in our 60-day discussion, we're not wondering about that elephant sitting there.
That area has been considered. It is planned both in the master plan as well as on the general land use map for purposes of compatibility.
So it's not part of this
anticipate.
annexation, but it is part of our concept for this master plan.
It is. There will be not only connectivity proposed, but also compatibility reviewed using these lands.
You know, we were going along nice and smoothly until you had to.
I thought it cleared things up, but maybe not.
Well, I mean, I don't know why we wouldn't want to talk to them and tell them what we're doing. I was down there 2 months ago, and we're looking at all different kinds of just easements for trails up in several different places, and they're in a process. They've been told by Department of Interior to go out and work closer with the communities. Sure. They were going to have a you all come meeting over at Prescott Resort and things and talk about what might this whole community area be looking at in terms of development, so they can do some better planning because they've been told to do so. So,
good.
I think it would be a good thing to have some dialogue on this.
Sure, that's good to know. I'd like to welcome the mayor.
Thank you.
Usually you sneak in and sit in the corner. You came right up in front this time.
Pretty close to legal.
Not trying to get votes.
You're just a happy man. You're finishing up 4 years of
6 years.
6 years.
6 years. 6 years of excellent leadership. So, congratulations on whatever you want to do in the future. Okay, no more questions from the commissioners. I'll be glad to open this up to the public. Anybody want to speak? I need your name and address.
Hi, Mr. Chairman. I think most of you know me. My name's Al Williams.
Hey, Al.
And I live at 901 Grapevine Lane. Several points that I'd like to make, primarily based upon my experience, extensive experience with the working with government and as a professional engineer. First is that I would presume that the layout of the sound areas for the airport could change 20 years from now. Is that right, George?
Subject to future studies, these designations could change. That is correct. Major changes to the operation on the airport grounds, major changes to the type of aircraft that operate from the airport could result in a new study with a new impact zone map.
Length of runway, et cetera.
That's correct,
Okay.
yes, sir.
Of course, that's not on the horizon now, but it could be a situation at a future time. George, could you move that Pinion Oaks up a little higher? There you go. As a professional traffic engineer, I'm a little concerned about what I'm seeing here because you have a annexation being proposed here that is bigger than the existing Pinion Oaks on the north side with no access to a major arterial. That subdivision, in my estimation, when it was originally proposed and built in Pinion Oaks, did not anticipate and was not constructed to accommodate that type of traffic from that size of development. It is obviously, as I know, a normal practice for substreets to be provided for future, but not for future major that is going to increase the traffic twice and over and above what is existing now in Pinion Oaks. Those streets were not designed for that. And I realize, George, that this will come up certainly at a future time, but I just wanted the Planning Commission to be aware of that you are going to have quite a bit of residential feedback at council level as this process moves along in that regard because of that. I'm not sure why it was designed in this particular way, but it was. The third point that I would like to make is that some areas of Pinion Oaks right now, as I understand it from contact in my walks through the area with some of the folks, has some water pressure problems already. If, in fact, the future water provision for this includes using some of the existing system that's there in Pinion Oaks, that could be a problem. Again, this is something that would come in the future. My suggestion would be that the city, as this moves along, require, as part of this annexation, a thorough traffic and infrastructure study as part of the approval process, so that going in, everybody knows what is involved and what's at stake and what the outcome would be provided you did this. It's not necessarily unusual in my experience that be required, and I think in this particular case, the folks in Pinion Oaks would benefit greatly, and I think the council and this body would also. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Al.
Mr. Chairman, in answer to some of those concerns, part of the cost-benefit analysis that's done through this process looks at infrastructure extension and expansion. That involves modeling, and with water and sewer services involves modeling, as well as looking at potential impacts on the city to extend mains within areas. So some of what Mr. Williams' concerns will be addressed through the cost-benefit analysis. Further, more detailed analysis usually requires some kind of development plan for us to base those calculations off of.
Yeah, Al, thank you for that question about the water pressure. But in reviewing the notes that we got on the 1967 agreement, which was originally done between the Deepdale Ranches and the city of Prescott, it called for, at whatever time the properties are going to be developed, that the 18-inch transition line and the 36-inch transmission and 12-inch would have PSI ranges from 4,400 acre-feet a year and 75 PSIs to 3,600 acre-feet a year at 15 PSIs. And I would imagine they're going to be looked into and made sure that as development occurs here, that the size of those water transmission lines adhere to that 1967 agreement. So,
Or exceed.
or exceed it.
Good point. Good point.
Current requirements would probably be higher than those.
Okay.
And as far as access goes, I would
But
get,
access is a major problem.
we'll be looking at that as it comes in the future. And, you know, we like continuity, but I guarantee you we wouldn't allow traffic going to the new annexation through Pinyon Oaks.
Both the master plan and the general plan circulation map anticipate connection to Pioneer Parkway
Another
at some
connection.
point.
Yeah, yeah, and then that's certainly what we would look at. So, yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, Jim Wilhelm, 12 Barhart Drive. George, if you could put up that first big transparencies that you have.
Is it
The one previous, there you go. You just made it bigger. The state-owned land, you've addressed it a little bit. What is the size of that in acreage?
it's a
About
640.
about 350.
Well, 640.
Probably
it's 640 plus
640 acres, yeah.
This is
It's one
a
section.
section. So this additional area, it's about 800 acres probably total.
And you said earlier that if the state asked for annexation, that it would be most likely brought in at the current zoning of the property surrounding it?
All annexations in Arizona start with the county zoning, but the state, just like any other developer, would ask for a rezoning at the same time as the annexation. That rezoning would have to conform to the city's general plan map as well as the master plan that covers that area. So it would have to come in as a combination of low-density residential and this mixed-use intersection that would occur at a future roadway connection.
And the last is on that future roadway connection, where and how would it be proposed to come into that piece of property?
With the initial annexation that we're talking about now, at some point, a road connection will occur east-west. This is the proposed alignment of Willow Creek Road. So this intersection would provide major street connectivity into that state land for future development of the state land. It would also allow for a continuation of a roadway through this area, which is not part of any of the annexations at this point in time, and then down through here with a future connection to Pioneer Parkway. Again, this could be 20 or 30 years in the future.
Thank you very much.
And that would provide a connector to that
Additional
parcel we're talking about, right?
Additional loop connectivity for both street services and for water services. We always look to loop systems.
So that there's a potential there. Okay, that's good.
Well, the Pioneer Parkway already has a stub, doesn't it?
It actually has two.
Has two stubs for this.
Okay, good. Yes, sir.
Good morning, I'm Jim Zimmerman. I live on Grapevine, 778 Grapevine Lane. George, could you put up the previous chart that showed the...
This one?
Just 2 points. Al did a great job describing our traffic flow. I live on the north side of Pinyon Oaks, as you see up there. Oh, not quite so much. And George pointed out that the 1502 had adjacency to Pioneer Parkway. It actually does not. It's quite a ways back from it. And you can see where that road, boy, if I had a laser pointer, yeah, that little tiny stub, as Al pointed out, is the road to nowhere. It's in the very back of our subdivision. It doesn't really go anywhere. It would be a very poor choice for connection to any other adjacent development for traffic flow. Also, we don't have a second way out of our northern Pinyon Oaks area. Symphony Boulevard, which comes in up there at the northeast end, is our only paved road that serves over 320 homes in that development. Down at the very bottom, at the lower north southwest corner, that's a stub that was originally probably intended to go out to Pioneer Parkway. It was never completed. It's blocked off. It's chained off. It's, in an emergency, would be completely useless to escape the flames that would be coming down from the chaparral into our beautiful subdivision. And when I say flames, can you pull that scale just a little bit back there, George? All that land behind us is wooded chaparral. It's the prevailing winds come off the mountain down right into our backyard. So we're very aware of defensible space and keeping that area protected. And I would urge council to consider that in any expansion. Just, you know, it's a potential area for fire. We have a limited access to escape it, and would appreciate any consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. My guess is there's no way we would consider traffic streaming through that subdivision. No, no way.
As a general planning purpose, you always want connectivity to allow for traffic circulation. But that's a typical residential street connection, not a primary access to a development.
Right.
We would anticipate that the access to Pioneer Parkway would likely be required before any major development.
Absolutely. That's the way I would certainly look at it.
Are some of our questions a little like putting the cart before the horse?
They may be looking further in the future than we're looking at this point in time. Part of our problem is that we can't guarantee when or where development would occur within the annexed areas, and therefore we can only make generalized plans and comments about street connectivity or water pressure or utility connections.
It's good to talk about it, though. It's concern, you know? Yes, ma'am.
Joyce Mackin, 1235 West Merrill, Williamson Valley Estates. I would like to comment, first of all, on access, since that's what we just discussed. Pinion Oaks is saying, don't go through us. Well, I'm Williamson Valley Estates, and I'm saying, don't go through us either. And also, Pioneer Park is open space. And I think the more open space we can preserve, the better off we are. So now, how are you going to access this?
Well, you saw the master plan, the proposed.
The master plan doesn't show the access.
We just looked at it, ma'am. There was a proposed arterial going right through the middle, coming right there.
And down to Pioneer Park.
And down to Pioneer Parkway.
But doesn't that have to go through some state land?
Yes.
Probably.
And how are you going to get permission to do that?
It's all part of the process of future development there.
We would anticipate.
Okay, so what you're saying is the access will not happen through Williamson Valley Estates or Pinion Oaks.
I would anticipate it wouldn't.
Based on this master plan.
And if we had to approve it, we wouldn't approve that.
So you would approve the road going through the open space?
Yes, of course.
I see. I see open space is not at the top of the list. My second question...
If you want to buy it and leave it open, you can do that. And I'm not being flippant.
It sure sounds flippant to me, sir.
No, not at all, ma'am.
My next question would be, and I guess this will be flippant also, is how do you bank water? Yeah. How do you bank water? Where is all this water going to come from? A lot of wells are already dry in Williamson Valley. Look at Lynx and Willow. I used to water ski on Willow when I was a kid. I grew up here. So where is all this water coming from? We haven't reached safe yield yet. We have Granite Dells Estates, which is annexed. No houses there yet. We don't know that impact. Pinion Oaks is already saying they don't get water pressure in some places. I'm saying Williamson Valley has a lot of dry wells. Where's all this water coming from? It's not going to all come from the Verde or the Big Chino.
Ma'am, that's not a question that we're here to solve. The annexation, I mean, the pre-annexation agreement says the water is allocated, and that's all we know about it. We're discussing it, and that's all we can do. I can't answer that question.
Okay, then my next question would be, I would hope that planning and zoning, this is not a question, it's a suggestion, would deny this annexation. And if you're going to approve it, I would hope that you would lower the density. Williamson Valley Estates is 1 house per 2 acres. Low medium density is 1 to 7 houses per acre. You know, we've been blessed in that the Deep Well Ranch borders us. And now, of course, that blessing is going to go away because we're going to have a subdivision right next to us. But maybe that subdivision could be planned with less density, with open space to allow wildlife corridor from Pioneer Park into the Deep Well, and also to utilize perhaps a little less water and put trails in open space in that land.
I would hope whoever develops that parcel will consider those issues. That's all we can say.
Thanks for all your helpful comments, and I again would hope you will deny this annexation.
Thank you.
Hi.
Yes, sir.
Phil Ertl, 5815 Cinnamon Drive. So as you look at that, 321 acres, I basically border the little stub ingress and egress. And while everybody's been talking, and I just want to thank you all for doing a great job of detailing this and explaining this. I just ran some numbers on the 321 acres, and you can have a density in there, as you have it planned out, of about 1,818 homes, which would be at least 1 car per home, probably 2 cars per home. So you're looking at, just to throw numbers out, you're looking at well over 3,000 cars a day coming through Williamson Valley, our area. So I would think ingress and egress should be a very, very significant issue there. And again, don't want to beat a dead horse, but you need to know what those numbers are, okay?
Trust me, we would be looking very closely at access to that parcel if and when it happens. Anyone else?
I have one other question.
Al?
I'm a little interested in how that little piece, could you show the density for that particular parcel, George, please? How did that little triangle get into the master plan some time back? It's a little bit unusual.
That would be my question.
That's a very, from my planning experience in many agencies, that's a very, very unusual piece in there. How did that happen, George?
It's based partially on the master plan that was negotiated with property owners. The green is a wash, and
right.
Adjacent to that is the approximate alignment of the connection to the south to eventually cross Pioneer Park to Pioneer Park Way. Mm-hmm. And it formed what the planner for the property owner thought was an appropriate shaped piece.
You know, I've been around land use decisions for many years in my public arena, and I just looked at it, and I'm sure you did too.
There was quite a bit of head scratching.
It's sort of like a sore thumb sticking out in there. It seems a bit weird. I realize there may have been some agreements that dictated.
If I might add, isn't that because of the washes that run through there?
Partially for the wash and partially for potential street alignment, but again, it was proposed by the property owner and was incorporated into the development agreement as part of that.
And we'll deal with it if and when it ever
One thing to consider for cities zoning, there's no requirement to develop at the zoning. You can develop at lesser zoning than that. So designating it as multifamily high doesn't mean it has to be a multifamily development. It could be any residential development in any density category up to multifamily high.
Okay. Anyone else?
Hello, my name is Douglas Cheng. I live on 1140 West Cliff Road in the Williamson Valley Estates. My concerns have been addressed, but since we drink from the same aquifer, do we have the water? Does Prescott have the water to support the population growth? And if that is so, I'd like to see the data that supports it, because there's many things that go around, and there's an article just saying where's the water going in the lakes. The 8 million gallons went down into the aquifer, which I think is great. But banking water, I'm no expert, but I like to think there is an expert that says there is adequate water for all this population growth. So that's the main issue. What is the amount of water that we can support in growth is the biggest issue for me. The other one is access. Everybody's talking access. We use Merrill Road, and Merrill Road, as you show up there in Williamson Valley Estates, is the main access to that piece of property. It was never meant to support 3,000 cars, whether you believe that's a number or not. So density and quality of life is a big thing, but water is a major issue for my concern. So that's my question.
And that's a question that we here at this board can't answer.
And again, I'd like to bring out that back in 1967, when there was preliminary talk about a development agreement between the Deepdell Ranches and the city, the notes that we have is that the first 950 acre-feet of water, which is coming out of the Big Chino wells up in Big Chino, and the fact that the Jameses at that time granted easements to allow for major pipelines to be brought down to the water treatment area and the plant, and then to be able to at someday tap onto the water rights that ranch had, that 900 acre-feet is not contingent on the Big Chino project. I mean, that's stated in the staff report. And it is to be made available to the proposed subdivisions in two increments. The first, 450 acre-feet upon approval of the agreement. The second agreement of 500 acre-feet upon final approval of the Arizona Department of Water Resources of the 2008 draft decision in order for the City of Prescott's application for modification of a shared water supply. So that water that you're talking about is still in the Big Chino wells that we have. And at that time, a certain amount of acre-feet was set aside out of the total numbers available for the future development that would be transferred back to the city when this property gets going. So,
have there been any studies that show where the level of water is in the aquifer?
There is an ongoing study now between the City of Prescott and SRP about the impact of the Big Chino.
Okay.
But this is water that's currently allocated for, that's in the Chino area, or whatever they call it, the little.
George,
Chino.
can you explain how the Water Allocation Board works after say we're looking at a subdivision coming in, okay? We don't have anything to do with allocating the water.
The Planning Commission does not. It's handled directly through City Council.
There's a separate board.
Well, the City Council has a subcommittee that recommends water allocations.
Okay.
But it's the council that actually takes those actions. And unfortunately for most people in the state of Arizona, it's complicated to understand. There's a legal right to water, and there's actual physical water. And in most cases, at this stage in development, it's the legal right to water that's the issue. It's the water portfolio that the city has. Water for these areas was set aside out of that existing water portfolio. That's legal water that we can allocate, set aside for this property. Doesn't mean that we're going to have water line capacities or pressure capacities or anything like that at the time that they need that water. That's part of our cost-benefit analysis, and that's part of the subdivision development process when someone wants to develop this property. They have to be able to get physical water from the city system to the property that they want to develop in order to get approvals for that development.
For a subdivision.
Yeah, and George, I think
there's a lot of information on the City of Prescott's website. There's a link on one side relating to water, and if you go there, you'll find a lot of the backup documentation.
I think I'm a layperson, and I understand there's legal rights to water, but if you only have a gallon of water and you allocate 5 gallons, you are not going to get water.
Right. I agree.
And people who've been living here a long time, and actually my family has, my in-laws, since 1960, and I've been coming here since 1970. It's wonderful, the growth. I accept the growth. We need the growth. But somewhere, and you have the power to say, we have a gallon of water, and there's 2 gallons that we need. So we shouldn't annex this for high density or low density or any kind of subdivision. I have a niece that lives in Oakland. She has a house. They can't flush their toilets. We don't want to become that way. So legal issues, I'm never going to understand them. But there should be studies to say how much water there is and how much we can take from it. You know, there's an article here. We just took over 800 million gallons from Lynch Lake or Watson to put in there. So it's a good thing. But you have the power to say, we don't need no more development, or can't support it with the resources that we have.
Well, the city council does. That's why they have to look at each subdivision as it comes in.
And, you know, I can see the revenue issue. Everybody needs revenue. But realistically, we're the stewards of this land. And legal jargon, I'm never going to understand it.
Well, again, to go back to your position, again, I'm a long-term resident. Places that were used for agriculture is a perfect example. In one of the sessions that I went to years ago, it was brought out by some of the water experts from the University of Arizona, and it was in, I think, the 2020 or the 2000 forum. And what they pointed out was that as land was taken away from agriculture, growing, say, alfalfa for horses is a good example, that it took 4.5 acre feet of water in order to grow alfalfa, and the purpose of alfalfa was to feed horses. Right. Now, on the other hand, if you take that water and you set it aside and you don't grow the alfalfa, then you have 400 or 4.5 acre feet of water available for residential or commercial development. So it's a numbers factor that these ranches had water rights, and as they want annexation, it's good for the city, not because of the revenue generated, but because it means that there's a control over the amount of water that's used because it's on the city system, and the water recharge is going into the recharge of the sewer plant. So it's a cycle. It rather than having 12 or 13 or 1,400 acres get developed in 2-acre lots and everybody drills a well and has another straw in the ground, taking it from the surface water and the water that's in that particular area below the surface, rather than a producing well that's got a certain amount of flow and capacity to produce what would satisfy the 100-year requirement of getting subdivisions approved in Arizona by the ADWQ.
And I think you expressing the legal aspect.
Right.
I like to know what is on the natural aspect of it.
Again, when I sat in that session, I had to stop and think, okay, one individual is saying there is no water, and then another expert is saying there is water, and as a layman, then I'm looking, saying, well, let me take 50% of what both of them say, so there's probably half as much.
You're optimistic, I'll be honest with you.
Well, again, it might be.
But having said that, it's really a natural thing. What is, I mean, there's changing climates and everything. Actually, this is a wet year. But
I'm quite sure that the Water Resource and the Water Advisory Committee, who keep those numbers, are able to answer your questions. And then when we get into this 60-day period, those are some of the important issues that we ought to be looking at.
And in the meantime, the city's website does have a lot of good information on it relating to water, including the studies that you were asking about.
Okay.
So please take a look there and see if some of your questions can be answered.
What I would say to the people here, the board here, that you have the power to, instead of to say water is not my issue, access is not my issue, to say unless that comes up solidly, we can support by water and access, and why do you annex this thing that can create so much more demand?
George, I think we have a situation here where I don't think anybody is saying you don't pay attention to those issues, Mr. Chin. One of the things I think we're failing to look at so far today is what's going to happen to that land if we don't annex it. It's not going to just sit there and be what it is forever. So something's going to change. So I think part of the purpose of an annexation is so a community can have some sense of control
To control the growth,
about in its environment. There will be things there. Somebody could put houses there and put the straw on the ground, as they like to say, and do septic tanks. So I think what we're saying here is annexation can be
Well, what
great
is the
for
zoning now? When you zone for things, if it's zoned for agricultural or farming, you're not going to have the high density.
It's zoned for single-family residential development in the
Currently,
county.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
So-
what is, when you say single, you saying half an
It's
acre?
set-
Like we have to have at least 2 acres per
It's 70,000 square feet per lot, so it's almost 2 acres
2 acres.
per lot.
2 acres.
And so you see the demand is just crazy if you multiply the numbers. Currently, you can have a lot less homes, a lot less people to,
But each one of them has its own well punctured down
Right.
into the same aquifer you're drawing
absolutely,
water from.
absolutely. But you just look, you times the number of families, it's a lot less families, a lot less use. So what I say is,
Okay.
you can
Well,
make.
we're
you
not
can-
going to get tied up in water
yeah.
because we don't.
I know, but I would think water should be a consideration.
Well,
of
it
this unit.
is. It is.
It will be, and it will be
And it
discussed
will be
thoroughly.
as each individual
And
subdivision
access,
comes in.
and access. Both
Mr.
things that
Chen.
you've seen a number of times, and
Mr.
I'm
Chen,
expressing
there's
that.
so many
Access and
factors
water.
here that you're not going to have answers for today. We're looking at 1,700 acres that adjoins the city right now.
Yeah.
And we're saying, what's going to happen here? Let's take a look at this and what we think could be a good thing for our city. This is not going to be developed tomorrow, please understand.
Oh, it won't affect I don't think so.
I
It
think
won't
a lot
affect
of
my
people in this room
lifestyle,
are
but
just not gonna
we
be
still are
here.
the stewards.
Please, let me finish, if you don't mind. I think we have to look at this from a general perspective and saying, this is land adjacent to our city. We want to have some control over this land rather than no control. Whether this plan agrees with all of us is a whole different issue. Annexation, I think, got complicated, and correct me if I'm wrong, George, with Proposition 400. Albeit a good thinking proposition, it required a master plan. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And that's why we today can't just annex this and say, let's look at it later on when people want to develop it. We now, because of Prop 400, have to say, we want to annex it. And oh, by the way, you need a master plan.
And an economic impact
And an economic,
analysis.
we have all these restrictions put on by Prop 400, which may have been a great idea, but the unintended consequences, we're now talking about, do we have streets 20 years from now? Do we have water 20 years from now? And my perspective on annexation, and always has been in my career, is that communities have to control what's adjacent to them. No different than you would like to control the properties around your house, which is why you're here today. So as a community, we should have a sense of what we want to do in this area. We have an airport, we have residential, we have streets. Let's bring this in with some sense of organization. Nothing's going to happen. Nobody's going to get water until they come up with a plan for how many houses. The roads aren't going to happen until you know what's going to happen there. But you have to start with a concept.
I guess it's who controls it. Right now, the county controls it, and the city wants
The
it.
landowner controls it.
Well,
And
but
you
he's
can put-
within the county, and
He
there's
can put how many
county.
houses there, George?
Yeah, they can they can take a 2-acre lot
Yeah,
and drill
not
a well and put a septic tank
So you
in.
can still have 1,000 homes there right now, roughly.
Roughly.
But
And they're on-
1,800 acres to an acre, 900 to 1,000.
well, I'm talking about the little piece there, which is 320. So you could have roughly
Well, we're looking at 1,300
150
also.
homes there,
Yeah.
as opposed to.
Okay,
But anyway.
we've got to move on.
Yep.
I appreciate your comments. Thank you. Anyone else like to speak?
Hi there. I haven't been to one of these meetings before, so
I need
I'm
a
going to
name
be
and
really
address, ma'am.
ignorant. My name is Lee Detweiler. I'm at 6140 North Bailey
Okay.
Avenue.
Thank you.
And I'm in the Williamson Valley Estates. I'm just...
I have a question before you go. Williamson
Sure.
Valley Estates, is that in the city of Prescott, or is that in?
No, that's county.
right,
We're
you're in the
county.
county. Okay.
Yeah, a minimum
That's
of 2 acres each.
It's the neighborhood on the west side of the
It's on
annexation.
west side of the
Yeah.
property.
Yeah, we're an older
So when you
neighborhood.
refer to Williamson County or whatever it is,
Williamson Valley
Estates,
Estates.
it's the 2-acre lots that are in
Right.
the city or in the county.
Correct.
That don't come under any water agreements. They can drill their own wells and have their own septic
Right,
systems. Okay.
right. And so one of my first questions is, okay, you've got a general plan. Can you annex part of it and not part of it? Or is a general plan one just Because I know that you've got the northern half and you've got the southern half. But if you agree to annex it, can you leave out maybe the southern section? Or I'm just asking if this is a general plan, can it be changed?
The general plan controls the land uses in the area
Right.
that were adopted by the city. The annexations are at the property owner's suggestion. So ultimately, the answer to your question is the city council could say yes to one and no to the other. Yes,
Okay.
that's certainly legal.
Okay, that was one of my questions.
And another important point is we do not approve or disapprove a subdivision. We make a recommendation based on the hearing. We don't have court authority to say this is final and
Right.
we've approved it.
But
we could approve
but
something.
you have the ability
We do
to
the
annex one
reviews.
section and not another?
Yes.
Okay.
But we make a recommendation to the city council as to whether or not we think that the information we receive warrants additional approval. So we might vote 5-2 for approval in their Planning and Zoning Commission. All that is a recommendation to the
Okay.
council. And then
Okay.
the council goes further and said, yes, we're going to do it, or no, we're not going to do it, or we're going to modify whatever they want to have done.
Okay. Okay.
So let's
Well,
understand the enabling laws of P&Z are different than, say, the Board of Adjustment, where the Board of Adjustment acts as a court and said, this is what it is, and if you disagree, it isn't the council that can override you. You have to go to court and get it changed by a judge's decision. We only make recommendations to the council.
Okay. Okay, well, there's one other statement I just want to make, that I know there's been a lot said about water, but I'm in the construction business, have been since 2007. No, 1997, sorry. I'm a little nervous right
Well,
now.
one of these days you're going to say 1964, and then I'll say, well, that's when I started.
Yeah, right? So anyways, I know I've had some issues with the county regarding getting city water at some of our building sites.
Well,
and
how
there
would-
is
County?
the advisory,
You
yeah,
mentioned
from
the county.
county, building
How
in
would
the
you get
county.
city water to a county property?
Well, because then there's a main line, because someone gave easement to
There are
annex.
some of them that are along city
Right,
easements where the city has water lines
Right.
that are adjacent to the property that you're talking about.
right. But it all comes back to a water resource report that is a 2005-2010. And it states in there, because I even had to work with the lawyers with the city, with my lawyer, that before October 5th of 2005, if you do not have an actual in writing with the city will not provide water, because the water resource report that was done, it requires that. So whether the Deepwell Ranch is stating that, well, we've got an allotment of water, unless you have an actual agreement with the city,
The Deepwater
can't do
Ranch does have it.
Mr. Chairman,
They signed their first
They
one in
do, yes.
1967, and they signed another agreement with the city
2009.
in 2000.
but that's to get water from the city.
No, it was a pre-annexation agreement, which had a whole number of items in it, besides water being one of the issues.
So,
And
so
Deepdale
if,
Ranch gave up their rights, and they allowed for certain easements of main water lines to come through their property and sewer lines to go back to the sewer plant as part of those pre-annexation agreements.
well,
Mr. Chairman, I think the answer, though, it comes back to the legal water versus real water.
Right.
The agreement that she's talking about is a water service agreement that is controlled by the process.
part
and
of that
water service
report
agreement-
was a report by an advisory committee, and it took a couple years to do,
Yes.
saying that the water levels were too low. That's why they wouldn't even provide people within the county
That's correct.
any water.
The city council chose to discontinue supplying county property with water from city services unless they had a pre-agreement
Right.
prior to that
Exactly.
date.
Right, that's what
And
she
that
said.
was to conserve water within the city. So
Yeah,
that is
so
absolutely correct.
I know that's an issue that keeps coming up, but that's a huge issue that needs to be taken into consideration.
On this particular property or on other properties?
Doesn't matter.
This particular property, because, you know, the Deep Well might be saying, oh, yeah, well, we'll give you our rights, but isn't that really convoluted? Because then now, I know this property was very quietly sold about 12 to 15 years ago, the southern section, because I watched it be sold, you know, and so I would think that unless, you know, okay. Anyways, I just want to put it out there.
Thank you.
They will require water service agreements as each development is
Right.
proposed that will go through the same process that you're talking about. They have to go to the city council and get a review and approval prior to any development.
Okay, well, it's just kind of a slap in the face when the city can annex an area in where the city has already told single property owners in the county, no, you can't have water. But then,
Unless you
the
annex in.
city can annex it in, and then it's like, oh,
Yeah.
well, you know, it's not right. So there you
But
have
again,
it.
it's an effort by the city council to conserve the water for inside the city.
I understand.
That doesn't mean we can't expand the boundaries, but the intent is to serve Prescott with the water that Prescott has control of.
I mean, an individual county subdivision could apply for annexation.
Oh, that's correct, yes.
So, you know,
But they're sticking straws in the ground. They're doing wells. The city of Prescott's water comes in from the Little Chino.
From larger well
From
fields.
up in Chino Valley, and so we're not going to stick anything in the ground
Okay.
in that area.
all right, guys, we're getting really hung up on water, and it's not even our issue. Ma'am?
Hi, my name is Terry Burnett, and I am a property owner at 1120 West Cliff Rose Road, which borders the Deep Well Ranch. And I have lived here for over 50 years, and I would like to comment on the access issue. I hate seeing roads go through the Pioneer Park. I don't see any good borders to have access to it. And then I don't know about going through state land. I don't know what the issues are on that. I also would like to say something about the water. I understand that you have an agreement in 1967. This is 2015. We have had drought in our state for years. Our water levels are low, and I can't understand how you would even consider high-density areas for annexation with the water issues that are currently going on. And so, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Okay, I think we're going to wind it down. There is a public hearing September 10th, which anyone's welcome to come and speak.
So, Mr. Chairman, that will be back here again with this body, with the Planning Commission?
Yes.
Following that, the next planned public hearing would be at City Council in
Right.
November.
And they will take public comments
And
too.
we will renotice so that any property owners know in advance that they have the opportunity to come back and talk to City Council as well.
And after we have our recommendation, if we do recommend on our September meeting, then the 60-day period starts.
For more public comments, right.
That's correct. We would accept written comments. We'll accept written comments anywhere along the process, and at each of the public hearings, we
Right.
would accept verbal comments.
And George, I might even comment on the Prop 400 thing. One of the benefits of the Prop 400 is the public comment. So today was a great start for public comment. I think we got a September 10th meeting. We're not here to rubber stamp whatever George presents, but I don't want to tell George that. We're here to look at the concept, and I'm here to tell you that Prop 400 brought in some complications that we're dealing with today. That master plan is what a lot of people are looking at. We look at high density, and I agree with the lady about, should there be high density? That may be a question I'd want to look at. But years ago, that wouldn't have been the case. We would have said, let's control this land in our community and bring it in. Now we have to look at a plan to
And tell
do
us
it.
what you want to do at the
And
time.
I hear everybody who's gotten up here, all 8 of you, talk about some details, which are part of this plan and density and whatnot. And I appreciate those comments. But part of the purpose, Ms. Detweiler, is for you to be able to get up here and talk today. We don't make a decision. We make a recommendation to council. And so your input is really vital.
Yes, ma'am.
Isn't there a meeting in October also?
That's a city council.
Yes.
That's a
City
Council
council meeting.
So we actually have one in September, October, and November, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah.
And if nothing happens on September 10th, you might have more.
Yeah, it is
That's
within,
true.
it's within the prerogative of the Planning Commission to extend or defer action at their September 10th meeting. So it doesn't necessarily go from your hands to council on September 10th.
And a
But
lot
you
of
have
that,
that
and a lot of that
opportunity.
decision depends on the reaction from the public. So, all right, thank you all for coming today. I appreciate your comments. And this is just a work session, so we don't have to be too formal about it. George, any other issues?
Nothing else for you today, thank you.
Yeah, I have a question
George?
for George related to this, but all we do is make the recommendation based on the information given. The council, do they have to have a supermajority if in fact there's a lot of opposition from the neighbors on this?
The supermajority would only kick into the actual zoning of the property. That's the only time that
Right.
comes into play.
Which is
Okay.
what we're talking about, aren't we?
No, not,
We're talking-
well,
We're talking
yeah,
about
there is some rezoning.
Well,
three
but
different parts of it.
Well, there is a
There is a
There is a
rezoning.
rezoning for both
rezoning.
pieces.
Not about
yes.
the
But that's to
annexation.
bring it,
No,
Right.
George,
but the
that's-
rezoning's one of the
Yes.
5 things.
Yes.
That's correct.
Okay, so they
Yes,
could
sir.
annex it, but not, they require a supermajority for just the zoning piece.
It
That's a
could be
potential.
if there's
Yeah.
enough.
Complicated by the fact that
Yeah.
this annexation does have a master plan with
Right.
zoning. Right.
Okay.
Not all.
But it's only a mass, well,
Yeah,
I
but-
guess that's a question.
Right.
George, when
does
the individual parcels come in for zoning, for example, when the individual industrial area comes in and they show their plat and their lots and their streets and curbs and gutters and sidewalks, at that time is when we would have, whether or not
Well,
there is a
the
our
other-
recommendation could
But
go
the-
to the council and there could be some objections and they need a supermajority to pass it.
But at the time that this annexation occurs, a rezoning is requested, and the supermajority could kick in with that.
At council.
Should there
At
be
council.
at
Yes.
council. But I will point out that the proposed zonings are in conformance with the general plan, so we've met all of the statutory requirements. We're not proposing something that's in violation of the general plan.
Which is kind of the reason why we have to almost approve it, since it matches all of what the council already decided in terms of
Well,
the
what it
intent on
does
the master
is,
plan.
it has to conform to the general plan. And the general plan was in conjunction with the airport master plans. So the fact that it does eliminates those two hurdles as far as having to get a modification to the general plan or the airport-specific plan.
But as far as our land use plan in conformance with that, the categories are very broad in the general plan. Any of the city's typical single-family zoning districts would comply with the single-family designation shown on the general plan. Any of them. It could be 35,000, or it could be 2 acre, or it could be 6,000 square foot lots.
Okay. I think at the next meeting, which will be a public hearing, a formal public hearing, George, I'd like you to be ready to speak to how the Planning Commission relates to water issues and approvals.
We can do that.
Maybe clarify that for the public so that
Certainly.
they understand what we actually get into legally and approve and what we don't.
We will start with that part
One of those
as part of our
don'ts is water.
presentation.
So, but obviously it's a major issue here. Okay, thank you, everybody. We're adjourned.